Hey folks, I'm Red Bandana, and I've never been as self-conscious as I am recording my own voice. Today I'm going to be talking about headless pistons. You might know of headless pistons, but you likely aren't aware of their potential or how you can harness it. You probably know headless pistons for their ability to break bedrock, but when they aren't deleting blocks, they can be used to teleport them. At the end of the video, I'll have explained why this can move both of these blocks in one instant. In order to understand headless pistons, we first have to cover some of the basics of redstone, including how pistons extend, and more importantly, retract. Real quick, some basic redstone terms that I'll use in this video. A game tick is the smallest unit of time in Minecraft, which lasts for 1/20th of a second. Ignoring some technical details, pistons take 3 game ticks to extend or retract. A pullable block is any block that can be moved by pistons, with the current exception of glazed terracotta. Note that this does not include air. A block update is when a block changes and decides to send an update to its neighbors, which is required for most redstone components to do anything. Lastly, anytime a sticky piston causes a moving block to skip its movement, I will be saying it drops that block. As an aside, I may refer to sticky pistons as pistons in this video, because it gets really tedious differentiating between pistons, headless sticky pistons, and everything in between. Everything in this video applies to sticky pistons, but most things don't apply to default pistons. Alright, back to the video. As you probably know, pistons are used to push blocks, and sticky pistons are also used to pull them. You might also know that when sticky pistons are given a short pulse, they have this weird behavior where they drop their block. But have you ever thought about exactly what conditions are needed for this to happen? That might not have been the question you expected, but I didn't ask it without a reason. In order to understand how redstone works, this is how we have to think. Because Minecraft runs on your computer, every process that runs lines of code, and the ones that cause this behavior allow us to make piston doors that are very fast. So how does this work? When pistons move, they always create at least one moving block. What is a moving block? Well, it's a block that's being moved by a piston. Moving blocks can't be moved by other pistons because they're block entities, and pistons never move block entities. Some of you are probably confused why I said pistons always make a moving block. Clearly, this piston just retracted without moving any blocks, and I can power and unpower this piston. Well, I sort of lied in my definition. There are 2 more moving blocks. When a piston extends, its head becomes a moving block, while its base just is extended. When a piston retracts, its base becomes a moving block. These finer details will clarify why pistons work the way they do. Now that we understand moving blocks, we can better explain how sticky pistons drop their blocks. When a sticky piston retracts, it checks the block in front of its head. If that block is pullable, then it will try to retract it. Notably, it never sends block updates from the piston head. If that block is not pullable, the piston simply retracts and does update the neighbors of the head. The more interesting case is when that block is a moving block. Unfortunately, said moving block must be pushed and going in the same direction that the piston is facing. When this is the case, it drops that moving block, leaving it behind. When you combine this with the fact that pistons can be powered and unpowered in the same game tick, you get the mechanism that allows doors to close instantly. Fast doors like these are called zero-tick doors because the pistons are given pulses which last for 0 game ticks. Now that we understand normal pistons a bit better, I can finally explain what this video has been leading to: decapitating our beloved pistons. Now, normally when you break a piston's head, it sends a block update to its base, which breaks it. Now, when a moving piston is destroyed, it doesn't send that block update. Because moving blocks aren't remotely blast-proof, we can generate headless pistons. When you think of headless pistons, you might think of black holes, which have the power to delete data and are really confusing and break what we know about physics. However, headless pistons are much simpler than that. Just piston bases which are extended, but lacking a head. Whatever we do with headless pistons, we do by retracting them. What this implies is that any game code we call with a headless retraction will be the same code that a normal piston calls when it retracts, but certain interactions are simply only possible when a piston is headless. This is because where the piston head once was, we can now have any block that we put there. Now, when a normal headless piston retracts, it always deletes the block in front of it. However, when a headless sticky piston retracts, we can refer to our 3 scenarios from earlier. The simplest is in scenario 2, where the further block is not pullable. In this case, the piston still just deletes the block in front of it. In scenarios 1 and 3, however, the block in front of it is not deleted. In scenario 1, where the further block would be retracted, the further block is instead left in place. In scenario 3, where the further block is moving in the same direction, it still gets dropped by the headless piston. In either scenario, the block in front of the piston is left there. However, there's more to the story. If that block just so happens to be a moving block, then the headless piston will drop that block regardless of which direction it's moving in. This has some really cool implications and is what allows us to make doors open faster than they ever could without headless pistons. As for the reason this is coded, I really only have one main theory. I believe that the code for a piston which retracts decides that if it thinks it's retracting or dropping a block, it first drops the moving piston head, which then carries out the retraction. But because under normal circumstances, the only moving block that could possibly be there is a piston head, it doesn't check whether it actually is a piston head or what direction it's moving in. This is just speculation, but I think it's a good way to think about things, if nothing else. Well, here we are now. We understand that we can use headless pistons to drop blocks where we couldn't before. If we just have a way to infinitely generate headless pistons, spoiler, we do, we can make a simple 1x1 piston door that opens instantly instead of taking a horrible 0.1 seconds. If we add more headless pistons and more dupers, then we can have a 2x2. And if we use a headless piston in the right way, a 3x3 door, which normally takes 0.25 seconds to open, can open in 0.15 seconds. A crafting table, which usually takes 0.1 seconds to disappear, can now disappear instantly. Now, we almost have every piece of the puzzle to actually make these doors. However, there's something we're missing. We can generate headless pistons with explosions, and we can use them to make doors faster. But it's actually really difficult to do both in the same place. The solution? Well, we have to move the headless pistons. Wait a minute, I thought extended pistons also couldn't be moved. Okay, we aren't literally moving headless pistons, but we can in 2 or technically 3 ways transfer the headless state of the piston onto another piston. All 3 ways involve, of course, chopping the head off of an extending or extended piston. The most intuitive and least interesting way is retracting a headless piston facing into an extending piston's head, causing it to delete that head. Since the head is moving, it doesn't send a block update to the base. The slightly more interesting way is retracting a headless piston facing into an extended piston's head, but there must be a pullable block it tries to retract. When this is the case, it doesn't send block updates from where the piston head would be, which means the base of the other piston doesn't get an update when its head is deleted. The last method is one that seems entirely bizarre at first. When you have a headless piston facing into the back of an extending piston and retract it, the piston's head gets deleted, while the base stays in place. Without one key detail of my theory, every one of these breaks a little bit of our understanding of how pistons work. In the first 2 cases, it seems that the piston head shouldn't be deleted when there's a block retracted by the headless piston. We said earlier that that causes blocks to not be deleted. However, when a piston retracts, it checks if there's a piston head in front of it. If so, it always deletes it. Additionally, I believe that when the dropping code is called, it checks if the block it's dropping is a piston head. If so, I believe instead of dropping it, it just deletes it, regardless of any other circumstances. When you combine these ideas with the fact that pistons process the block where the head usually is before the block in front of it when retracting, you end up with a completely reasonable explanation for every one of these transfers.